Now, what's the secret to a memorable title run in the WWE? Is it the duration of the title reign? Is it the matches that are incorporated into that title reign? Or is it something else? Now, whilst we may never know the true formula to creating a memorable title reign in WWE, it's easy to work out what makes for an unmemorable one. If nobody remembers a title win in WWE, it's usually because it was either incredibly short or the wrestler in question was hardly on television with a title following their big win. But which ones were unmemorable? Join us now as Wrestlelamia looks at 10 WWE title wins that nobody remembers. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos, and follow us on Facebook for exclusive lists. Number 1. The Rock and Chris Jericho win the Tag Team Championship. The Invasion storyline in WWE was one of the most complicated storylines in WWE history.
The very fate of WCW is in my hands.
What should have been a simple WWE vs WCW storyline turned into a story that involved top talents turning babyface to heel and vice versa multiple times over a 5-month period. However, one of the highlights of the Invasion storyline was the work of Chris Jericho and his feud with The Rock. The two would initially feud as two babyfaces before Jericho would turn on The Rock.
Not just think, it doesn't matter what you think!
Jericho and The Rock would have an acclaimed match at 2001's No Mercy pay-per-view, which was historic for being Jericho's first world title win in WWE. On the night after the pay-per-view, Jericho and The Rock would win the tag titles from the Dudley Boys in an effort to show that they were both still on the same page.
Could it be? Will it be? Yes, it is!
And Jericho and The Rock winning the tag titles together should have been incredibly memorable. The problem was that the reign would only last a week, as they would lose the titles to Test and Booker T on SmackDown. This came at a time when the titles were seemingly changing on a week-to-week basis, so a lot of the reigns during the Invasion era slipped under the radar. Number 2. Rikishi as Intercontinental Champion. Rikishi was most well known for being in the Too Cool stable during the Attitude Era, as well as being the man that ran over Stone Cold Steve Austin in 1999, as he did it for The Rock. But do you guys remember that Rikishi actually had a run, albeit a short one, with the Intercontinental Championship? Yeah, on the June 22, 2000 episode of SmackDown, Rikishi would defeat Chris Benoit for his first and only Intercontinental Championship reign.
If he hits it, we get a new champion. He connects. Here's the cover. There's two. Rikishi wins the Intercontinental title.
This huge win for Rikishi came out of nowhere with virtually zero build. Now, the run would only last 2 weeks, as Rikishi would lose the title to Val Venus on an episode of SmackDown, making Rikishi's first and only singles title run incredibly unmemorable. Number 3. Jacqueline wins the Cruiserweight Championship. Jacqueline is well established for being one of the greatest women's wrestlers ever, and this was embedded into history when she was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2016. However, what most fans forget about Jackie is that she actually had a reign with the Cruiserweight Championship, and this would be the first time a woman has held that title in the entire history of WWE. On the May 4th, 2004 edition of SmackDown, reigning Cruiserweight Champion Chavo Guerrero would issue an open challenge, and this open challenge would be answered by none other than Jackie herself. Jackie would shock the wrestling world and she would win the match and the title. But despite how shocking the title win was, the run wasn't too memorable, as she would lose it back to Chavo in a rematch at 2004's Judgment Day pay-per-view, and her involvement in the Cruiserweight division was quickly forgotten about following the pay-per-view. Number 4. Edge as US Champion. WWE Hall of Famer Edge is one of the most decorated wrestlers of all time. He's won almost every major singles championship, as well as having legendary reigns as one half of the tag team champion with Christian during the Attitude Era. One of Edge's title runs that slips under the radar, however, is his brief run with the WCW United States title in 2001 during the Invasion storyline. The title win surfaced in the middle of Edge's feud with Christian, as Edge would randomly face US champion Kurt Angle on the Raw prior to Survivor Series in a match that he would be booked to win. Now, the only reason he would win this match was to set up a unification title match against Intercontinental Champion Test 6 days later at the pay-per-view. Edge would actually win the match in question, and the Intercontinental and US title would be unified for the first and only time. Following the Survivor Series, the US title would be retired for the next 2 years, making Edge the last US champion of the Attitude Era. Number 5. The Godfather as IC Champion. The Godfather was one of the most popular wrestlers of the entire WWE Attitude Era. The Godfather would only win one singles title during his entire WWE career, and this would be the prestigious Intercontinental Championship in 1999. On the April 12, 1999 episode of Raw, The Godfather defeated Goldust to win his first and only championship.
The Godfather wins it!
His run, however, wouldn't be memorable, as he would only hold it for a little over a month before dropping it to Jeff Jarrett on Raw. In total, he would only defend the title twice on WWE pay-per-view, making it one of the most forgettable runs with the IC title of all time. Number 6. Harvey Wippleman as Women's Champion. Harvey Wippleman was most well known for being a manager in the WWE in the early 90s. However, one of his more infamous moments involved him actually winning the WWE Women's Championship. On the January 31st, 2000 edition of Raw, Wippleman won the WWE Women's title from the Cat whilst he was in disguise and he was using the name Hervina. The match was a Lumberjill Snow Bunny match. Yeah, thankfully we've never had one of those again, and would take place in a snow-filled pool surrounded by female wrestlers. The decision to put the women's title received extremely negative reviews from fans due to how disrespectful it was to the other women. His reign would thankfully only last until the next edition of SmackDown, where he would lose the title to Jacqueline in under a minute. Number 7. Bret Hart as US Champion in 2010. Fans were delighted in 2010 when it was revealed that Bret Hart would be making his return to WWE after 13 years away. Hart would face Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 26 in, unfortunately, one of the worst WrestleMania matches of all time, and a match that was so bad that fans following the match had zero desire to see Hart wrestle ever again. But following Hart's WrestleMania match, he actually stayed on WWE programming and was featured quite heavily. He would become the manager of the Hart Dynasty and would later become the GM for Raw for a short period. He would even win a singles title during this period, which many fans wish to forget. On the May 17, 2010 edition of Raw, Hart would defeat The Miz to win the US title in one of the most bizarre booking decisions of the past decade.
The move that made Mr. McMahon tap out at WrestleMania! The sharpshooter! The sharpshooter! There's his tap down! Brett's the champion!
Now, the logic behind this was because the show was taking place in Toronto, it was something for the live crowd to remember. However, it was incredibly damaging to The Miz, who WWE were grooming to be a main eventer during this time. The next week on Raw, Hart would vacate the US title, thus rendering the title switch completely pointless. Number 8. Brian Kendrick as interim WWE Champion. Now, technically this wasn't really a title switch, but more of a moment where Brian Kendrick was actually interim WWE Champion for a short time. In 2008, WWE debuted the Championship Scramble concept, and this was a new match type which involved 5 wrestlers facing off in a match where the last pinfall would make them the champion at the end of a 20-minute time limit. The concept would debut at the Unforgiven 2008 pay-per-view, and one of the better matches of the pay-per-view was the Championship Scramble match for the WWE title. The match would feature WWE Champion Triple H, Brian Kendrick, Jeff Hardy, MVP and Shelton Benjamin, and all of the challengers had never been WWE Champion, which made it incredibly exciting as a fan. And during the match, one of the victories would be secured by Brian Kendrick, which made him the interim WWE Champion for a short period. Sadly, this isn't actually classified as an official WWE title reign, but nevertheless, it was a cool moment to see on pay-per-view, and a moment which many have forgot ever happened. Number 9. Randy Orton as US Champion. Randy Orton is one of the greatest pro wrestlers of all time. He's a 14-time world champion and has held almost every major singles title there is in WWE. But one of the title wins fans seem to forget about occurred in 2018, and it was Orton winning the US title. Orton would win his first and only US title at the 2018 Fastlane pay-per-view in a match against Bobby Roode. However, the reign would be quickly forgotten about as he would lose the US title in an underwhelming fatal 4-way match at WrestleMania 34, which consisted of Orton, Roode, Jinder Mahal and Rusev, when Jinder would actually capture the title. His title reign was a huge missed opportunity to elevate the mid-card on SmackDown, but it was clear the WWE had no desire for Orton to be anywhere else other than at the top of the card. And number 10, Drew McIntyre and Cody Rhodes as tag champions. Long before Drew McIntyre was WWE Champion and long before Cody Rhodes was an executive at AEW, they were actually tag champions together in WWE. In September 2010, WWE would pair Drew and Cody together to form an extremely short-lived alliance. The duo would win the tag titles at the Night of Champions pay-per-view in a tag team turmoil match, and fans expected them to have a lengthy title reign. However, at the next pay-per-view bragging rights, the duo would lose the titles to the bizarre team of John Cena and David Otunga, thus making the reign one of the most underwhelming reigns in the history of the tag titles. Following the loss, the duo would separate, and the alliance would never be mentioned on WWE television ever again. But there you have it, guys, 10 WWE title wins that nobody remembers. Did you guys remember any of these? Are there any more moments you feel belong on this list? Let us know in the comments down below, subscribe if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram and Facebook for exclusive lists, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.